Friday morning, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and thank you kindly for joining us on Real Talk with Keith Smith. It's great to connect with you on a show that I have very much looked forward to. Neil Williamson, the president of the Free Enterprise Forum, friend of the program, is in the house. This guy is just a fantastic human that I would love to belly up to a bar with, and same with Supervisor Ned Gallaway, another fantastic human as well. These guys know Albemarle County and Central Virginia inside and out. One programming note for you. The star of our show, Keith Smith, is enjoying, I believe it's his 38th wedding anniversary, either 38th or 39th, with his beautiful wife, Yonna Smith. They are in St. Martin for a good portion of June. But have no fear, Ned Gallaway and Neil Williamson are here. Judah Wickhauer, if you can go to the studio camera, my friend, and let's welcome Supervisor Gallaway and President Neil Williamson to the program. I love you guys. I love your content. I love the analysis that Supervisor Gallaway provides. I think we should start, Neil, by highlighting this gentleman has a milestone moment in his near future today with his daughter's graduation.
Yeah, my youngest daughter, Maggie, graduated from Albemarle High School this past Monday. And it's been, it's been a long road for Maggie to get there, so the whole family's very excited, and yeah, we'll have some friends, and she put an invitation list together, so we'll be celebrating that later today. So
congratulations.
Proud papa moment.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Neil Williamson, how are you?
I am well.
Good. It's good to see you.
It is good to be seen, and happy to be here on Real Talk without Keith Smith.
Yeah, there we go. Keith Smith actually watching right now. We hope you have a beverage in your hand. Keith Smith. Gentlemen, I will get out of your way. Neil, we'll start with you. Items in the notebook of interest for the viewers and listeners, my friend.
Well, it is fascinating to me. From time to time, there are the board in Albemarle does something that not all board, actually very few boards do, of supervisors, and they go on a retreat. Because they are a public board, this retreat is open to the public. Believe it or not a large number of public were at the meeting. I believe there were 2 of us. But the reason it's important is, back when we used to ride dinosaurs to class when I was an undergrad, I studied organizational communication, and we have one new supervisor in Albemarle, and you would say, well, that shouldn't be that much of a change. Well, the way organizational communication, that shifts everything. The whole dynamic changes, not positive or negative, necessarily, just it's a new dynamic. And so the purpose of this retreat is to spend some time, and only the senior staff were there, which last time they did a retreat, I think they had every staff member there. But I kid, but there were a lot of staff there. In this case, there were a handful. But it was not live streamed, so I bet most people wouldn't know that it happened. If a board meets in a Hilton Garden Inn on Pantops and there's no live stream, did the meeting happen? But what I took away from that was a desire from the board to work together and to understand each other as they work together. And some interesting fissures in this all-Democratic, which is not saying anything out of school, they are all Democrats, they are not monolithic in their thinking. I also learned that B. Lepisto Kirtley was a monkey bars champion in the 3rd grade.
I didn't know that.
These are the hard-hitting facts you get from the Free Enterprise Forum.
The Rivanna supervisor.
The Rivanna supervisor was the reigning 3rd grade monkey bars champion.
Her second term, B. Lepisto Kirtley, you are a Renaissance woman.
That's hysterical.
Ned, what did you take away from the retreat besides B's great monkey bars work?
Well, I've done a number of retreats over the years, and every single one has been a little bit different. But we do something in Albemarle that not, again, all boards necessarily do. You don't really know that until people come from outside of your organization and go, you guys are doing something that other folks don't always do. But we have a set of operating guidelines that are put in place, and it basically defines how we work with one another and then how we work with staff. So for example, if I have say a constituent emails me about a noise complaint, and they're asking for my help to do that. And I know Lisa Green is a zoning, person, and I could email her directly. If I do that without copying her manager or her department manager or somebody in the county executive office, well, now I'm starting to do something that a supervisor shouldn't be doing. So, and one of the operating guidelines is that, our county executive, he's fine with us if we want to go to a Lisa Green and say X, Y, or Z or ask a question, but the operating guideline says you will copy the department manager and or the county executive office. So that just makes it operate well. So you're not getting anybody else's way. Now you don't have supervisors dictating what staff should be doing because that's not legal. That is not our job. So when I have constituent issues, a lot of times I don't even go down into the staffing level. Sometimes to the department manager and then always copy, but a lot of times I take it directly to the county executive or the deputy county executive and I let them parse it out from there. Now, it's important not just for working with staff, but I want to make sure that the other supervisors are playing by the same rules that I'm playing by. So, it's important as a board that, all right, look, if I'm doing it this way, you need to do it that way. Because, just because if 4 of us are doing it properly and 2 aren't, then they're mucking things up. And that gets in the way of doing what our board's job is, which is enacting policy and getting our strategic plan accomplished.
But question for you. This is from me here. So I am on the board for this building, for example. And one of the things I had to learn as being part of this board is the parliamentary procedure. And the procedure for a condo mixed-use building like this is much less intensive than running a jurisdiction like you. Parliamentary procedure and that learning curve. How steep is it? How quickly can it be picked up? Someone like Mike Pruitt's in a few months, 6 months, 5 months into his first term. Can you put that in perspective?
I think a lot of folks that are there tend to know Robert's Rules of Order because most of them are built on that. So Albemarle is no different. We have some specific rules of procedure that vary, and then there's even a qualifying statement. If it's not specifically called out here, then the default is Robert's Rules of Order, which I think most boards would go by. So if you're brand spanking new to a board and you don't know Robert's Rules of Order, then yeah, you've got a lot to learn and figure out. But if you don't, you kind of fall into line because you've got other people doing it in a chair running a meeting and keeping people kind of in their lane as far as that goes.
Right, that was one of the interesting things in regard to procedure. There's been a holdover from the COVID Zoom days whereby the supervisors each get an opportunity to speak in order, and the order rotates by meeting. And I don't think Mr. Gallaway will take this the wrong way, but if you give a politician their name and say, well, do you have any comments, it is very difficult for the politician to say, I have no comments. It's just not part of their makeup. So what ends up happening is you go around, and maybe you go around twice, once for questions and then for comments. It extends the meeting, and there was an open question. Is that something that should continue? And the overarching theme, I think, was yes. Even though it may lengthen the meeting, it makes it very clear when folks, that everyone will have the opportunity to speak, and that folks are equally provided that opportunity. That being said, with regard to Robert's rules and the rest, there's also some unwritten rules that seem to exist, in so much as there's an area in the meeting for new business, and I've seen supervisors float an idea in conversation before it ends up in a new business piece. And I've also seen supervisors in this locality and others take something out of the clear blue and throw it out there. And I will tell you, the first works better than the second because you've had time to think about it and to move forward. But it is really a testament to Albemarle's organization that they tend not to surprise each other. That's not true in all the localities that I cover.
I was going to say that. You all highlight this, and I'm not just saying this because Supervisor Gallaway sitting across from me seems to be one of the most organized of the jurisdictions in Central Virginia. Unfortunately for a talk show host, not as much fodder or unexpected behavior comes out of your meetings. We generally like those as talking points as a talk show host. Yours are what I like to call predictable and expected and in the background. And it's a government that, for the most part, is run very well.
Yeah, we should focus on the work that we need to do. And I'll push back on the speaking order, because we're blaming or putting the purpose on the pandemic, but it was really implemented prior to. The pandemic allowed us to kind of solidify it. And I was the chair.
It was your fault.
Very much behind putting this order in place. And this is from years on the school board and the Board of Supervisors. If you think we have the meetings now, go back to a free flow without that speaking order. I guarantee you it will add an hour to 2 hours to the meeting. And here's why. The first year as chair, I sat with each of my scripts. I had a script that I created that I asked the clerks to prepare for me. And I would time, so if an applicant, let's say a public hearing comes up, staff would give their presentation, I'd note the start time and the end time. The applicant would start, there were times, then I'd note the start time and the end time. Same for public comment. Then I was noting the supervisors when they took over. And clearly, supervisors talking is what adds length to a meeting. It is not the organizational structure behind it. If you have an opportunity for 6 people and you know you're going to talk and when you're going to talk, you somewhat take some of this, the political gamesmanship out of it. Before I had an order like that, I like to talk last. Right? Well, once I became chair, I had the chair talk last, right? And now we've kind of stuck with that, which Robert's Rules of Order actually says that you should do. Well, when I was on the school board, sometimes you'd have 7 members, 3 people would talk, and then we'd come to a vote, and you had 4 people voting that hadn't even talked about the topic. And I think I'm a person that says, well, if you don't have anything to say, but you're still going to vote, then somebody should hear you say, I have nothing to say. So I think the organizational piece of that speaking order actually allows us to have a more efficient meeting, but the devil's in the details. If you do a round of questions and then another round of questions and a round of comments. So whoever the chair is has to be able to look at it and go, all right, we just got one person that maybe does follow up. You don't have to go through the whole round to hear I have nothing to say at that point.
Well, if someone's casting a vote, as someone who's a taxpayer and follows this closely, I would like to hear the elected official have something to say on why they're voting.
Right.
I think it's almost a cop-out, I have nothing to say.
Well, in some cases, you're saying the same thing that the last 3 people said, and we hear that all the time. Although I have not heard an idea that I've heard. I've had this idea and I've not heard it endorsed yet. But if you attend an Albemarle County Board meeting of any kind, there is a light system in front for public speakers. I'd like to see 6 of those.
In front of the supervisors?
In front of the supervisors.
Okay.
There are places, in fact, I remember once or twice on the school board, I did put a time limit on, because there's 7 school board members, it adds that additional piece. And we had some folks at that time, including myself, that could go on and on. So it was just like, all right, folks, we've got a certain amount of time. You each get this amount of time. Let's try to stick to that, and you can kind of manage it. But
Viewers and listeners, let us know your thoughts. I see a number of business owners watching the program here. We'll highlight Roger, who did a fantastic job on yesterday's show. A couple of folks in the mortgage game, Patty Rowe and Olivia Branch, watching the program as we speak. Do we want to get to the inclusionary zoning?
I'd love to do that. I mean, I'm referencing back to the April 30 article that Neil put out on the Free Enterprise Forum. I'm not going to do a good job of setting that up or reminding folks. I'll leave that to Neil.
Why don't you set up what inclusionary zoning is?
So the inclusionary zoning is adding in into the units for affordable housing. So you could have market rate or buy rate type of projects, and then like you saw in Charlottesville, where they just did this massive upzoning, where then you include affordable units as a requirement and or voluntary. But the article that Neil had referenced was from out in California, and talks about how inclusionary zoning, what it does to overall housing production, both below market rate units and just normal market rate units, and starting to get into the offsets of the decisions that are there. And I think that's, I'll pitch back to Neil to say, all right, you might want to set that article up a little bit better.
I would love to add some color and then pass it to you. It's Free Enterprise Forum. The headline is Increasing Inclusionary Zoning Harms Housing Production. It's got a timestamp of April 30, 2024. It's absolutely fantastic. Yesterday we had Roger Voisinay, who's watching right now, and was it Richard Price, the architect watching the program. They're developers It's a real estate agent and an architect that developing projects. City of Charlottesville, this came up on yesterday's show, affordable housing requirements in the new upzoning, and it's now not the draft zoning ordinance, it's the new zoning ordinance, as architect Price highlighted. He said, here's what Charlottesville's requiring. With a project that is 9 units or more, 10% of those units must be affordable at 60% area median income for 99 years if they are rentals. 99 years. I specifically asked the developers, the architects, and the real estate agent what they make of this, and they said this will, without question, diminish housing production and have the opposite effect of what they are trying to do. And this is what you highlighted.
I highlighted the report, and those are two practitioners that are in the throes of it.
In the game.
And I'm looking at this a little more academically, and this is a somewhat academic paper that was put out, but absolutely what I'm seeing anecdotally is a number of folks looking at 9-unit developments. Now, to be fair, the zoning code does provide for a very expensive buyout of that inclusionary zoning piece. But it is, I wrote back, I think it was in November or maybe October, Charlottesville's wrong number. And 99 years is ridiculous.
Ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. And it is, I know why they did it. I said it was ridiculous then. I told them they shouldn't do it, and here we are, and they did it. Golly, I've got some power. But the idea behind inclusionary zoning is that if you force developers to put this into their projects, whether it's a rezoning in Albemarle or it's a by right in Charlottesville, they'll build it because they will. Well, there's a problem with that. There's math. And there's a bigger problem with that, and Jerry, you may appreciate this, is the finance world of real estate. There are very few, there are some, but very few real estate developers in Central Virginia that self-finance. What does that mean? Well, does that mean you go to a bank? Well, many of them go to banks, but the majority go to private financing. When you go to private financing, you have to hit a certain number with your return on investment, as well as so that you can see the profit margin. And when you achieve a certain profit margin, then it's considered financeable or doable. If you don't hit that number, it doesn't get done.
They don't get the money.
And so I tell folks about this. They say, you know, you were a liberal arts major, Neil. You can probably figure this out. What's 20% of nothing? I said, I can figure that out. That's nothing. And so inclusionary zoning, if it creates a situation where it's not financially feasible to finance, it doesn't happen.
The interesting aspect, and throw it to you, Supervisor Gallaway, anywhere you want to go on this, the interesting aspect of the Charlottesville dynamic is it could be a proof of performance for Albemarle County to learn from.
Oh, and we've taken obviously a different approach. I think Neil's argument doesn't change. We have the incentive program that we've put in place. It's a different timeline, and it's a different parameters. But to Neil's point, I think the thing that we are trying, that the Albemarle board has tried to understand and learn, and I think have made progress on that. You know, it's not that if you hit the number, the investment number for private finance. So let's say that, you know, what are some of the numbers they look for? Isn't it like 5 or 6?
Right.
There's certain, like, it's a small number and it's like a score. Well, let's say you get a 5. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean you win, because whoever that private investor is looking at your project and how many other projects. And if somebody else does a little bit better and they see a better return, then you may lose out still, even if you've got a good project here locally. So I appreciate that. And if you're starting to, I don't think investors who are not from your community have the probably wherewithal, well, they have the wherewithal. They probably don't have the patience for understanding the nuances of Albemarle County's incentive program or Charlottesville's upzoning plan or inclusionary zoning plan. They're just going to look at that number and go, all right, we have a responsibility for certain returns. These are investments that we're going to go for to get those returns. Where are the best one to do? Is it in Charlottesville? Is it in Ohio? Is it, you know, and then they pick accordingly. And we have to be mindful of that. I mean, that's why I've never disputed the fact that Neil's overarching point of that inclusionary zoning, which is in all the literature, and these are from pro-housing places, say that it can, and often caution against, don't undermine, because there's a certain tipping point where you not only will hurt overall housing production, you'll start to hurt below market rate housing production.
What do you make of that?
Well, I appreciate that he recognizes that the academic research agrees with me, which is always nice. But the take on it is really one of, how do you get the numbers to work? And there are two numbers here, and that makes it kind of challenging for folks to understand in Albemarle County's code piece. The idea of how much affordable housing is number one, and number two is how affordable. And those are two different numbers that dramatically impact what they call a pro forma for the project. So if you are required to produce 20% that is affordable to 60% AMI, or you're required, under the old provision, 80% that's affordable to 80% AMI, or 20% affordable to 80% AMI, those are very different numbers when you calculate them out.
Absolutely.
And the size of your project pushes. Now, the supervisors get pushed back all the time that you aren't asking for enough. Clearly, developers are just rolling over you. I heard somebody just last week say, you know how many units they're putting into Rio Point that are going to be affordable? Not enough. And I just look at it as like, yes, we have, that is a great project located in the heart of the urban area. We don't take position on projects, but golly, would it seem right to not have housing there and to not to have both affordable and density? Those are the triggers here, not only inclusionary zoning. Mm-hmm. There are other triggers that Albemarle County controls that hinder housing affordability.
And I know this man well enough. I think he tossed me a softball to expand the developmental area. I have a feeling that's what Neil was highlighting here. Currently 5%, and this could go back to
less than 5%, but that's okay.
Well, I was going to highlight that. I learned this from Neil as well. 5% of Albemarle County is allocated to development. That's commercial and residential. And because of the topography in that 5%, not the entire 5% can be developed. So Neil always likes to highlight it's less than 5%. Supervisor McKeel previously, on previous shows, actually sitting where Neil is sitting right now, has said until that 5% is at capacity, I don't see why we would expand that 5%. There certainly does not seem to be the voter or taxpayer appetite to expand that 5%, although the tides seem to be slightly changing. Supervisor Pruitt is on the dais. He's very much in favor of expanding that 5%. And I think as the voter base and tax base starts either gentrifying or becoming younger, or the socioeconomic statuses of the voter base or tax base starts changing, we may see those tides change even more when it comes to the 5%. And I believe at a recent meeting, you guys kind of hinted at maybe adjusting or massaging that 5%. Supervisor Gallaway, you have a lot of ammunition right here.
I loathe that Supervisor LaPista curtly called it the Gallaway conversation. But I don't know that Supervisor Pruitt actually went that far, unless he said that somewhere else. I don't think he went that far. But you know, the point we made that Neil summarized nicely, that we agreed to have a discussion about expansion, and that's a first step, right?
We celebrate small steps in local government.
In Albemarle County.
But the point I was making in that is that you can't talk about, oh, well, we won't do something until capacity's reached, and then not know what capacity reached means. So what does that mean? Do we really understand it? And numbers have been thrown out. You know, I've said on this program a few years ago and said, oh, it could be 50 years before we hit capacity. And now we're throwing around 20 years, and so what really is it, and what does it mean?
But this is another thing that Albemarle County can control. If you look at the study that was done by an independent group that was hired by Albemarle County, if Albemarle County continues to approve rezonings at the low level of density that they have been approving them prior to really the last year, they will run out in the next 20 years for space. And that is clearly a political piece. There was a project that I recall not too far from the Keswick area, the gated hallows of the Keswick area, that was originally proposed on, I think it was quarter-acre lots. And they ended up putting in, or they're in the process of putting in houses on 1-acre lots. If you are using your precious less than 5% development area to develop 1 acre a unit, you are not efficiently developing your development area.
I saw what happened there firsthand. That was a southern project right outside the gates of Glenmore that faced significant headwinds and friction. And the lots certainly increased in size and the density was diminished. The neighborhood, which is roughly 940 rooftops, Glenmore, galvanized and organized and opposed this project, and they utilize a lack of infrastructure as the base for opposing this project, which I can totally understand. That road is a cluster, and they also highlighted EMTs and the lack of safety personnel that can reach this particular location of Albemarle County as a reason not to build this project in totality. Some would call that NIMBYism, others would call that highlighting infrastructure concerns. It's a fine line there, Supervisor Gallaway. You've heard both sides on the dais.
Well, he's not. I mean, Neil again is not incorrect. I think the percentage that we've been approving, we've said it's like 56, 58% of the max, and you can use the one that was just cited, that particular project, but you can also look in my district where, like Rio Point, for example, there were more units available there, and the first developer brought forward, I'm forgetting the numbers now, but I believe before the first developer basically gave up or whatever the right.
Which happens to a lot of projects in Albemarle County.
But they had reduced their units even before it got to a decision. The decision ended up failing on the 3-3, the first go around. And then the new developer is in, and they came back around the similar amount. They didn't ask for more units than what the max was or could be. I think the site, I think it's smart. I think that developer looked at it when I think this is the reasonable amount for the net buildable area on that site for units. But I think it's a point that over the last 2 years of applications, I can't think of a project other than one I think the one you all just mentioned was
Breezy
the last
Hill.
one that we, in the process of working with the board, the units came out fewer than what we had.
Yeah, but that's a little bit of backroom working, because the reality is before you ever get anything, it goes through a pre-application whereby the staff will say, yeah, that's not going to work, and it takes a strong applicant to say, well, but it's in your comp plan and we're going to go forward with it. Instead, they choose to. Now, on the flip side, the market is also important, because the market may not want the highest density that could be in a place because of infrastructure, because of something else, but because if you build it and they don't sell, you're no longer in business. So there's a balance there for the developer as well. But I think that the board has shown a much more propensity to allow density where density belongs in the last 2 years. The other thing I wanted to bring up that Albemarle County could control with regard to housing affordability, I think every project should have the same timeline as Rivanna Futures. They filed that application in January, they're going to be approved in May.
Well, I could push back on that a little
Please
bit.
do.
I think Supervisor Gallaway could push back. I'm not sure if he wants to push
Neil's
back.
bigger point,
No.
all the projects, when we had our incentive, a joint meeting with the Planning Commission, and we had a slew of developers there with us back in December. The second thing, the biggest incentive when we were talking developer incentives was tax abatement, tax incentives. The second one was predictability. And that's ultimately what I think, when a developer says predictability, that's what they're talking about. We want to have a predictable timeline so that an application can go through. But it's not just, I will push back on this. I think there are some wonderful developers out there that put very thorough and complete applications in. And then I think there are some that are like, well, let's see what they say and wait for us to put it through. And that adds time too. And that adds more staff time. If you have a complete application that's submitted from the get-go, then the onus is on Albemarle to process it properly and respond to it. If you put an incomplete application in and now staff is spending time telling you what you didn't do or these things and they're responding to that, you're adding time to the process.
I could also slightly push back on that too, because if you go down the road of a very complete application and you're uncertain about approval, you have a lot of sunk costs that go into that complete application. Where I can see why someone would go with an abbreviated application, see what sticks to the wall, the proverbial pasta, and then adjust or pivot on the fly.
But it's just going to take more time.
That's fair. That's fair. I see both sides.
No, it's not. Albemarle County has an application in front of it right now by Albemarle County that has none of the detail that they would require from a private developer, and they're going to approve it next week.
He's talking Rivanna Futures. I'm going to push back on Neil a little bit on this. Rivanna Futures was to keep the intelligence sector secure in our community. If memory serves, it was a $1.2 billion financial impact, a white paper financed by the Chamber of Commerce, Albemarle County, and the city of Charlottesville. There was scuttlebutt, if you may, I'm not sure how legit this scuttlebutt was, that St. Louis was trying to lure the defense sector away from Albemarle County. Supervisor Price came on this show, sat in Ned Gallaway's seat right there and said, this is the greatest economic impact decision Albemarle County has ever made. Rivanna Futures on the Greene County line saved the University of Virginia's creation. Those were her words.
Right, and this is not about Rivanna Futures. This is about a rezoning proposal that's in front of Albemarle County and what level of detail is required in a rezoning proposal. So what I'm saying is use the same rules. If they can use a bubble plan, they're not even saying what their roads are going to be like.
Yeah.
They've got a concept plan that maybe will fit, but don't worry, you're going to get to weigh in on all of it. No.
But the county couldn't risk, and let's get Supervisor Gallaway in the mix here. The county couldn't risk losing the defense sector here.
That's gone. That's off the table now.
But that was why the decision was made and why it was greenlit.
It's being purchased. It's done. They own it.
Right.
Now we're going through the rezoning place. So I will tell you that
this is great talk show fodder.
A private developer has the same kind of pressures on them that Albemarle County does. They're pushing to have it done because they need grant funding, and the grant deadline is June 1.
Can't wait to hear from Supervisor Gallaway on this.
My new goal when Neil and I do this show is to see how high I can get his voice
He's
on.
passionate. This is great.
Because I think I've achieved a new level today, which has been great. We're also talking to, I mean, this might be a nuance that Neil may not appreciate, but we are talking the difference between residential and one that's not going to include residential. And the plan we just approved Wednesday night was a bubble plan. I mean, it had a road network on it. It had where the building envelopes are going to be. They had done the work with the neighborhoods that the developer went through with the emergency access points that weren't going to be through. When we did Keswick Hall, that was a complete bubble plan. So there are plans that we've done with less detail. I think sometimes the detail that's required at the planning commission level can be a little interesting. But when it's come to us, we want to know where the buildings are. I know that if it's on an entrance corridor, that it'll go through ARB, that they're going to handle the look of it. I trust that process. So it's not that we don't look at bubble plans.
But can you tell me another plan that was filed in January and heard in May?
I wouldn't. Even if we didn't have the examples, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I don't often know the timelines of applications unless somebody comes and goes, I submitted the application in June of 2021 and now it's June of 24 and it's not through. So if that's happening, unless somebody illuminates that to me, I don't go in and go, when was, we don't ask those questions.
Well, their
because that's
application numbers include the year that it was filed.
I understand.
And this is the first one that's been filed that's a 24 number that
I'm not sitting here and saying that Albemarle is lightning speed on getting applications done. We've had plenty of conversations at this table about it. But Albemarle is trying to do what is necessary to get the predictable fashion in play so that I know that we understand that more time equates to more cost for places, and we're trying to bring that number down.
I will say that Albemarle County is trying to bring that number down, but they're not there yet.
They have done a good job of bringing it down. At its worst was during COVID, I would imagine.
Judah, do you have that slide that I sent
Actually,
you?
Albemarle was one of the few in COVID initially that was still doing
No, agreed.
was still doing applications.
Yeah. Yeah, but the timeline, there, because of job openings, the timeline of approval got rather lengthy.
Well, and even today, after significant effort, we have applications. This is for building permits, single-family building permits. And so you're looking at the average number of days for a single-family building permit is 36 days. Average for a townhome unit is 47 days. The outlier here, what's the maximum? For a townhouse, you had one townhouse, this is just one, but the outlier is 160 days. Building permits aren't legislative decisions. They run up against a code, and you either pass or you don't, and need changes. How long should a building permit take? Albemarle County Community Development agrees it should take 2 weeks. That's a reasonable, predictable amount of time. Right now, Albemarle County is running 4 weeks. Now, if you go to the outlier of the 160 and you figure out the rough carrying costs for a $300,000, $400,000 townhouse, and you're carrying that for, take away the 2 weeks, you're carrying it for that period of time, the actual carrying cost is about $5,000. Well, that's $5,000 a unit.
Yeah.
And townhouses don't go by single units. You've got to multiply it by 5 or whatever. But if it's $5,000 per unit, how many people are you pricing out of the home if the home has to increase in price by $5,000? Nationally, it's like 1,250 people can no longer afford the home. That's not true in Albemarle because we've got a smaller data set, but the point is still there. This is controllable. I believe community development is working on it. They are continually telling me the changes that are being made to make it happen, but we continue to want to put a spotlight on this. This is only magnified higher when you're talking about site plans and rezonings that take 2 years. The carrying costs associated with that and the level of detail that has been required for many years, now maybe it's changing, is significant.
It's significant.
And that carrying cost ends up getting passed on to the end user.
That's fantastic analysis. Do you want to touch any of this, Supervisor Gallaway?
I mean, this is a point that I think we've known I'm not going to say, oh, this is surprising news to me.
It's not a gotcha moment.
This is something that we've had conversations about in open and in public as well, not just at the board level, but on shows like this. So it is something that, there's two elements to it, right? So then there's the actual technology or the business process of what you use to do these. And there have definitely been an antiquated system that we are moving away from and implementing a new one so that you're actually in the real world and not using something that was been used 20 to 30. I mean, come on, technology and software programs from 5 years ago are obsolete, let alone 10, 15, 20 years ago. Then the other piece of it is your manpower and how many folks do you have to process items. And, community development, I'd have to go back and look in the budget. I don't know if we even gave staffing to community development this year.
I don't believe you did.
They wanted a assistant director of planning, I believe. And we didn't do that. And when we upped the tax bill on real property, it went to public safety predominantly and social services. So community development has two pieces they're working through that is always going to be a challenge. Because, when I campaign, I tell people I run on public safety, public education, and economic development. But if I'm sitting there and I'm looking at, I need police positions or fire positions or social service positions versus community development positions or parks and rec positions, I mean, I'll just be point blank about it. There's a different priority level that I'm looking at there.
100%.
Now, how do you get them all? Well, we'd have to have more money to pay for that stuff. And I know there are people out there, no, go cut here and then use that money there. Well, okay, I'm great with that argument. Let's do a show someday on that to go, where do we shave it from? And let's do the exercise supervisors have to do of go, all right, now we have to go in and go, we're going to cut 3 parks and rec positions to put over here in the police department. And what does that equate to when you have a community that gets, that a lot of times the political rallies of the last few years have not been public safety, have not been rezonings, But they've been turf fields at Darden Towel.
And mountain biking, Ragged Mountain.
And mountain biking. We've received more emails, or as many emails on that than we have on any rezoning that we've received since I've been on that board.
Right. You guys are in a tough spot. You're in a tough spot.
But flip it over.
Well, and I'm not bringing it up because we're in a tough spot.
No, you have to make more decisions.
I'm fine with being in that spot. I wouldn't have run for the position if I didn't want to be in that spot. But to fix the problem, it's both a technological problem and it's a staffing problem. And in the big scheme of things, if that was the only department you were running and you had the funds available to just add the staff and add the technology and just get it done and snap your fingers, you would do it.
Well, but when you file a building permit, you pay for that. You pay a building permit fee. Oh, wait, there's a technology fee you have to pay too, and that's going to save the technology world. But you're a customer, and you're now getting service of a 160-day turn?
Stop using the outlier.
That is the outlier.
It is the outlier.
Yeah.
But
you're good at using outliers as the norm.
Well, let's do the average. So you have a month and a couple of days to wait rather than a 2-week turnaround. So you've doubled acceptable amount of time. That's the median, not the outlier. So a month from the time you're ready to go and build, turn in your building permit that meets code before you get the green light. We've agreed that's not acceptable. We're getting it to 2 weeks. That's where we're going.
And it's a trackable issue so that with what does currently exist, both technology and current staff, it is something that we can track and say, okay, are we making any improvements or are we not? And as any organization will do, if you're not hitting your benchmark or what you think is acceptable even internally, then you have to do what you think is best to improve the number, track it, and then see where you stand. And the board has been bringing this up and asking where we're at. And I know that the county executive and the deputy county executive and the community development team know that that's something that this board wants to improve upon, because we do know that the costs get passed on to the end user and the buyer.
Right. Well, another thing that Albemarle County can do to help housing affordability. In February 21st, Albemarle County endorsed a resolution of intent to allow residential uses.
I knew we were going down this road.
Commercial
Yes.
and office space.
Yeah.
I, of course, met with staff and said, where are we? We got our resolution of intent. And they pull out this piece of paper that's got 30 resolutions of intent on it.
Is that a different slide?
No, I don't have a slide for that. Okay. Sorry, there are a lot of resolutions of intent. And as I sit in a meeting last week and watch Albemarle County dedicate more funds to a very worthy project out at Southwood, and I hear some angst about how much Albemarle County money is going in. There's a disagreement about whether it's even Albemarle County money in some cases because it's federal pass-through money. But I think, wait a minute, here's something Albemarle County could be doing that doesn't cost them anything. Where are we? And nothing has happened yet on that February resolution of intent. I'd love to see a supervisor champion that idea.
Do we do now, and that's the resolution to allow, just restate what that one is.
Residential into commercial.
Yeah.
Do we have, and I don't know, I have not had anybody come to me saying they're itching to do a project that had, if that's in play, that they'd be ready to go.
Well, and I should offer this here. Little pushback on Neil. The cost associated with converting commercial to residential is obscene.
Well,
the likelihood of this becoming reality is slim to none. But to Neil's point, let's get government out of the way and let the market figure it out itself.
I wouldn't have brought this forward if there wasn't a property owner who came to me and said, I can do this. Now, I've also said all the way through, this is not thousands of units.
It's the silver buckshot.
It's a silver buckshot,
right.
Quoting Robert Liberty.
Right.
But it could be 100, 200 units. And in this person's case, this property owner's case, it's a lot of low slung. You remember the 70s office buildings that were thrown up? And quite frankly, if they are going to be rented at a decent rate, they're going to need reinvestment anyway. So if you could reinvest, have the property owner, not the county, reinvest in a manner that allowed habitation and it's going to be in the development area. It's going to have plenty of parking, likely be on the transit line. What's standing in the way? And what it is again, staff and work plans and getting things done. And I was amazed at the speed and alacrity of the staff in getting the developer incentives project moved forward. They moved so fast they didn't let any of the stakeholders know what was going on really at the end part, but that's fine. We've raised our concerns with it, but when a supervisor makes something a big part of their campaign or their philosophy, it seems to get traction faster. Just as you were talking about a supervisor reaching out to a staff member about something, it is it was interesting in the retreat. The county executive said, you've got to understand the staff member who you're spending 5 minutes with, that's the most important 5 minutes of their day. And when a supervisor speaks, it has weight. So I am boldly begging for support for this concept so that we can get this thing moving while we still have a property owner or two that may go forward with it if it was allowed.
Anything you want to touch on?
I mean, that's something that I would love for, as a property owner has discussed their interest in it, I'd love for them to reach out so that I could understand it more. This is a thing that where if the project was in front of me and I started looking at it and understanding it more, yeah, I'd probably start speaking to it differently. I've told you before, I'm open-minded, I'm pragmatic about it, but this is not one where I've had anybody say, here's what I want to do, or here's what I'm interested in doing, and here's what's standing in the way from a local government standpoint. So how does it become a priority for me if I'm not having it a real-world example in there?
Totally fair.
If
That's
it's
fair.
theoretical.
That's fair.
Totally
Now,
fair.
real quick, because this is why it's important for me not to call that staff member for that 5 minutes. What if that staff member's working on trying to get the building permit time from 4 weeks down to 2, and now I've called and said, hey, this, that, or the other, and they stop working on that and go running over here and working on that? It's not going to help us improve that time.
Right.
So that those guidelines of why you, as a supervisor, we have to allow our managers to manage, our leaders to lead, and we can't get in their way for it. We are not elected to dictate to staff their day in and day out workload.
Very well.
Very well
said.
put. And I couldn't agree more. And there was a time in Albemarle County when a supervisor might spend the day wandering the halls of Lane High School looking over the shoulder of staff members working on projects. It happened. I watched it happen. One of the downsides to being in a job 20 years is you've seen some stuff.
Do you want to highlight who that was?
No.
Do you think this is as fun as having your feet up on a beach with a little
This is fun. Are you having
umbrella
fun?
drink?
You guys enjoyed this.
Keith, I hope you're enjoying your anniversary.
Should we go to the special use permit
Well,
content?
let me bring this up real
Okay.
quick, because I think this is something, and I don't think it gets answered today, but I'd at least throw it out there, because I know that a lot of real estate folks and developers and such listen to this program, not just today, but always. But in the article that Neil wrote about on the 30th.
This is inclusionary zoning?
Yep, and
Okay.
this is the, I forget the person's name who wrote the article, but you can go to Neil's website and get the link to the full article. But in the executive summary at the end, and this is kind of long, it says, now this is talking about it starts, the fact that poorly calibrated inclusionary zoning policies could lead to reduced housing production and higher rents and housing prices, or both, should prompt caution about increasing inclusionary zoning requirements to meet below market rate production targets. Then the paragraph finishes, instead, policymakers should generally reserve the use of land use reforms for increasing overall housing production to improve affordability and choice in the wider housing market. They should use other tools, including increased public subsidies to produce below market rate homes and assist lower income households. Public subsidies will be more cost effective in this context. When they're getting at public subsidy needs to be increased, and then how cost effective, we started to get at this question Wednesday about, we can't just see an affordable housing project in front of us and go, affordable housing, let's do it. We have to start, and in here they talk about having well-calibrated, he uses a phrase somewhere about well-calibrated decisions about inclusionary zoning. And this is the the piece where I feel we do a really good job with economic development projects. We've got all the calibration and the data analysis to go, oh, if we give a tax abatement for 10 years, by year 11, here's all the, what we're going to reap. And if we don't do this, then we're not going to get that. So good decision. I feel like the level of analysis to get at what the per unit cost for us locally for an affordable unit is, which is going to change, we have to be able to get at that level of calibration and analysis so that, because we have limited funds, to be able to go, if we got $1 million or whatever the number is, and we've got $20 million worth of things that we have to choose from, then we should probably be picking the projects that gets us the best return. And if you don't have the front-loaded analysis of it, then how do you make that decision on which the projects are best to do? So that's something that since the incentive program has been put in place that has really been on my mind. And I appreciate and hope that more developers will come forward to understand what the incentive program is and talk specific projects about it, because that program does have the flexibility to try to fill in the gap of the cost changes to the developers. And it gets at that level of kind of, all right, now you're giving me you're giving the board the level of analysis you do to determine whether you're going to move forward on a project. It gives us a level of analysis that goes, is this the proper use of public funds to subsidize, to get the good, which is the affordable housing unit? Sorry, that was kind of
That was fantastic. You want to touch on that?
I'll use the same term that Ned used with me.
Okay.
I won't say that he's wrong.
Supervisor Pruitt watching the program here. We appreciate you, Supervisor Pruitt. Should we hit special use permit?
Sure.
I mean, he published this on the Free Enterprise Forum. Fantastic website. You guys should not only read but support the Free Enterprise Forum. The headline, and it was published 3 days ago, what makes a special use permit special?
Oh, was this? I missed this one. I haven't read
This one's pretty good.
This is
Quintessential Neil Williamson right here.
well, that meaning that it's long, boring, and
No.
Was Dr. Seuss or Airplane like?
no, none of that.
No references.
No, I didn't put those references in there, but the idea was there was a meeting in Greene County where a supervisor, relatively new supervisor, said he didn't like special use permits because he wanted to treat everybody the same. And he was being explained that a special use permit does not create precedence because it's predicated on the specific application in front of them. That's kind of a difficult thing to get your arms around, understanding special use permits. But special use permits allow when supervisors write or approve county code, they say, okay, you can do A, B, C on this zoned land by right. You don't have to come to anybody or do anything. And then on the next piece, there's D, E, and F that are slightly more intensive. You're going to need to come and get a special use permit for that. Why? Well, because it's more intensive and it can fit here, but it doesn't always fit here. And so we have to look at the particulars of your situation. And part two of that is going to come out next week, where we talk about making special use permits less special. Albemarle County realized about 10 years ago that they were requiring a special use permit for every drive-through. Well, when that permit came through, every drive-through had the same 5 conditions, although I do remember one that came through, and the then planning commissioner, Rick Randolph, said, well, couldn't we have them go the other direction? And the applicant said then they'd be on the wrong side of the car with the food. But it was a beautiful moment. Again, I've seen a lot of things. That was the Bojangles on Pantops, if I remember correctly. At any rate, when staff and the market said, hey, look, you're putting the same 5 conditions, what if you wrote that into code and make it a use, but under that use, you have to do these 5 things. You'll free up planning commission time, you'll free up staff time, you'll free up board time, and they did. And you know what? Nobody's been complaining about drive-thrus that I'm aware of. I know people love the Chick-fil-A drive-thru.
I think the current example are homestays.
Homestays is a good example. We do, average of 2 or 3 every meeting.
And they take up time.
They take up time. They take up staff resources going out to look at them. And the rationale, I mean, the one they looked at this week, the rule is if a building existed when the regulations came about, you could use that for a homestay
In the rural area.
In the rural area, as
Over
an
5
outbuilding.
acres, yep.
Over 5 acres. So, but in this case, the folks that have 20 some odd acres were building a new building, and in fact, they're building it now because it'll be their by right use. They could use it as additional housing. They don't have they have development rights on the parcel as well, but they want to put in Airbnb, and the rationale, as I remember, when the homestay regulations came through, is we don't want to see a bunch of these things popping up in the rural area, so we're going to limit it to only existing dwellings. Well, that thinking seems to have shifted a little bit in so much as this particular applicant has 2 existing buildings, neither of which would be very good qualifiers for this use, and they're putting up a nice new space for it, and if they don't get this approval, they're going to use it for a guest house. So in the end, the board voted unanimously to approve it. Well, that's an easy one. Well, why don't we just say, if you follow all the homestay regulations, new construction's okay? Isn't that an increased investment in the county? And
Especially if it meets the setbacks. And the other.
That's what I'm saying. Meets all the other regs. I mean, and why wouldn't you, if you know you want to use it as a homestay, you look at the regs and you make it fit.
Yeah, the special use permit, this is one with Airbnb that I tend to be a little bit more, I had different thoughts on some things when we put the ordinance in place. So the special use permit really became a way to go, well, we think that's reasonable to your earlier point of why it exists. It could be okay, but let's do the look so that we can understand what the impacts are so that we get the sign off on it. But there becomes a point, like one of the most common reasons we allow a special use is the setback piece, where if there's screen, it seems to be more about screening than the distance. So a lot of those are going through. But you're absolutely right. If supervisors want to have that level of their hands wrapped around that issue at that level all the time, then they're going to continue to come. But it seems like sometimes we want to debate or reconverse or rethink what our ordinance is, and it's not even so much the application that's in front of us, and that takes up a lot of time as well. Now, the thing that I think will give at least supervisors a lot less heartburn is the change at the General Assembly this year, where usually, so for an Airbnb like this one that Neil just talked about, the special use permit will run with the land. But now, after July 1, we could theoretically say it ends with the current owner. So that if the current owner wanted to do an Airbnb with that, they'd have to come back in and get a new owner,
Yeah.
and get a new special use permit or whatever the ordinance would say. I think for a lot of things, there have been supervisors that make a decision based on the applicant, and you use the character and the history of the applicant, et cetera, and you have some faith in that. But that applicant or that owner may not always own the property, and that's what can give supervisors pause about, well, what's going to happen in 15 years or 20 years? Well, if it ends with the owner, I think I think you're going to see a lot of that change after July.
How do you feel about that?
I think it will take time for Albemarle to revamp their ordinance. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that change took a year to get into the ordinance.
But how about ending with the owner
Ending
as
with the
opposed to
owner?
carrying with the property?
You know, the question becomes one of how much of that becomes subjective?
Okay.
So if
I think a lot of it becomes subjective.
I'm somebody that sued the county a number of times for a number of really good reasons and lost every time, but now I want to be able to do this. Why would you say no?
Could they consider other elements like
You
criminal
gotta base
history,
it.
back taxes?
You're looking at impacts, though.
Right.
If you have somebody, there was one Airbnb that I voted against that didn't go through because of issues with how the property was being used and run to begin with.
Okay.
So if you have somebody that's their history suggests that they don't really care what the ordinances and the rules are, and then they're coming in and saying that, well, okay, come on, you kind of screwed yourself there.
Okay.
You know, but if you have somebody that's operating and doing all the things, then it's not to say that they won't break the rules in moving forward. But you're still having to look at impacts, and usually when the folks that are not breaking or not following the rules, the impacts have broke out into the neighborhood. So it's not like I'm just going, oh, Jerry's a bad guy.
Yeah.
It's Jerry didn't do X, Y, and Z, and his 10 neighbors had to deal with this, and that's how it's on our radar.
That's fair. That's fair.
But property owners have rights, and
Yeah.
they should have universal rights. They should be, the rights of the property owner shouldn't be dictated by who the property owner is.
Well,
I think that would diminish some value of properties that have currently an Airbnb, and if it stops with ownership and not carrying with the land, then you're not going to be buying that property as if it had Airbnb potential.
There are lots of businesses that have licenses, government licenses, that do not transfer. We've
Yeah.
mentioned wineries before. If you are buying something for the license, that's a challenging business proposition. You should be buying something for what it offers, and then the potential for those other things if they require licensure.
That's fair.
Well, I like this particular one for the homestay stuff. I don't think this is one that's a bigger piece where when rezonings come in, and there are a lot of times special use permits part of that rezoning, and part of it wouldn't matter anyway down the road. But I think specifically this was one for homestays that we could see enter into the conversation in Albemarle.
And when a special use permit is granted, in my opinion, it is a new property right that has been given to the property from the supervisors. The General Assembly has allowed the opportunity for the locality to say that right ends with this ownership. It could
continue with new ownership, but they would have to then reapply and apply themselves and ask
Well,
for
the
it.
special use permit is extinguished, and a new special use permit will have to be issued.
Correct.
Very good stuff right there, guys. Hour flies by when you're having fun with these fellas. How about we close with open-ended opportunity for Supervisor Gallaway and Neil Williamson? Anywhere you guys want to go on anything?
Oh, we're there already, huh? So, coming up, we're going to keep having this conversation. So if there are folks listening that have thoughts on how to get at better analysis or to make better calibrated decisions about inclusionary zoning, et cetera, I would love to hear about that. And to the earlier point of if there are redevelopments, the commercial going into residential that are out there, I'd love to kind of start understanding and hearing about that. Summertime for the board gets a little reduced. We only do one meeting in July. A lot of times that gives staff an attempt to plan their vacations and things like most of us tend to do in the summertime. But, what's always interesting about the summer is it will fly by at the board level. And next thing you know, when fall, you're already gearing up and prepping for the next budget and for the next CIP. It's transportation projects and transportation priority lists will come. Work plan's going to come up. So things that the board, once budget's behind you, you start looking to certain priorities. And before you know it, it'll be October, November, and you'll be like, holy crap, another year's gone by. And that's where we're at.
Well, I would like to commend Albemarle County in so much as they screwed up. They sent property bills with the wrong number on them.
We talked about this.
And you know what they did?
They apologized.
They stood up in front of the board and they apologized.
Yeah.
And accountability is critically important. And the CFO stood up and explained how it happened, who it happened to, and how they plan to fix it in very clear terms, and apologized. And then they put out a statement apologizing. It's an error. Those of us that have been in business for a long time, I don't know, most of us, I have a few, errors that happen. And generally speaking, you learn from them. You don't make the same one twice, hopefully. But errors happen, own them, and they did. And to that, I give Albemarle County a lot of credit.
Did anyone pay it in full?
Lots of people do from time to time anyway.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten that data yet.
It's an interest-free loan to the county.
I'll be curious to see if that's the case, because the part that was incorrect was the total, but it was if you read through the bill, it
was incorrect on the stub, but it was right on the top portion of the bill.
You're going to be somebody that look at this and go, wait a minute, this isn't right.
Right.
But we've got really good, talented folks, and they're to make it. And in the public world of local government, it's the case that if you do make an error, it's often public and it's in front of everybody. And even if that weren't the case, though, the caliber of the folks in that department, it's devastating to make that kind of error. They know that this is going to be frustrating and upset and emotional for people, and they don't want to put people through that. So I think I appreciate Neil giving commendation to them for that, because that speaks to the types of folks we have over there. But I mean, that, and they don't want to do that. That's not not something you want to have happen.
And I hear from folks constantly that mistakes are made throughout, and that when they're called in, they call the finance office. And I had someone tell me this on Wednesday. They said, well, these 3, for whatever reason, shouldn't be on my bill. And they said, well, you're right. And they fix it. Now remember, it doesn't always go your way, but you always get an audience. And that is the way government is supposed to work.
You do a good job, Supervisor Gallaway, of having staff's back.
Our staff is phenomenal. So, are we perfect? Hell no. Nobody. Who is? But the fact is that they do care. We just got a strategic plan report that we're going to be seeing at the end of August that is going to show, going down into the weeds to all the different staff level, of how their work and what they do is working to advance the strategic plan of the county. And that speaks to that accountability level too, that they're going to be showing, this is what we do day in and day out, so that mid-September, here's where we should be tracking to be on par to be where we need to be at June 30. And when you have that caliber of individual working in an organization that's attempting to be a high-performing organization, then it's really easy to have their back, because they are good people to stand behind because of the work they're doing.
Supervisor Ned Gallaway and Neil Williamson, President of the Free Enterprise Forum, Rio District Representative Ned Gallaway. The show was easy for me. Love shows like this. Appreciate you guys very much. The show is archived wherever you get your social media or podcasting content. Judah Wittkower behind the camera. Thank you, producer, director Judah Wittkower. We appreciate you guys. The I Love CVille show is up in approximately 1 hour. Take care, and thank you for joining us. Well done, gentlemen. He's going to let us know when the cameras and